Welcome back to our business editor, Owen Fairclough, with us here on set. We've got new figures out confirming the French economy going into reverse just hours after Francois Hollande, of course, set out his plan to try and get the country growing again.
Good morning, Stuart. Yeah, the timing of that couldn't be crueler in some ways. The Bank of France confirming its most recent estimate that in the third quarter, the French economy will contract by some 0.1%. We already knew that. That is a second estimate. But as Stuart says, that estimate comes just hours after Francois Hollande, effectively tried to relaunch his presidency somewhat with an interview on France's main television channel. The key points that he set out there were spending cuts and new taxes that will be worth around 30 billion euros to try and bring down France's public spending among the highest in Western Europe. Forget for a moment all that stuff about the top rate of tax. That will only affect a few thousand people here in France, 75% for those who earn €1 million above. What I thought was the most interesting was that Hollande was fairly pessimistic about the growth prospects for France. He thinks that this year growth will be 0%, and you can see that in line with that estimate from the Bank of France. But next year, 2013, he thinks it will just be 0.8%. When you consider, Stuart, that countries like the United States have had around 2% growth or are on course for it, really anything less than 2% is fairly anemic and simply won't bring down the high levels of unemployment that France has had, double-digit unemployment for the last couple of years or so. So it's difficult to see on this assessment how he thinks that in 2 years' time, France will be really motoring along and have a decent recovery.
I mean, last time I spoke to you was about 3 hours ago. He hasn't changed his view. You're still sounding a bit pessimistic, sounding as though Hollande's setting himself up to fail.
Well, it just seems that he's set himself up to try and do so much within the next couple of years. In fact, in the next few months, he wants to reform a lot of the labour code. It's one of the thickest documents you can get in France, a couple of thousand pages long. You have to remember it took Germany, the most competitive country in Europe. It took the Germans around a decade to get their own labour reforms through. It meant millions of workers had to do without a pay rise for the best part of a decade. Francois Hollande didn't talk about that, understandably perhaps, in his interview last night. It was also confusing a little bit. We had a big ruckus in the summer when Peugeot, the French car maker, wants to shut down its key factory. Well, that is a competitive move, you could argue. By taking those jobs overseas, Peugeot could make itself leaner and meaner. And yet Hollande wants to keep that factory open, wants to keep those jobs in France. You can't really have it both ways. Is this economy going to become more competitive down the line?
OK. All right. Well, let's have a look at the markets at the beginning of what is going to be another busy week, not just here in France, but in the Eurozone as a whole, in fact. It's a mixed picture, in fact, at the opening bell for Europe. Both the FTSE in London and the CAC 40 here in Paris, just 0.1% up. Both Germany and Spain have opened marginally down. Asian markets, they've also been muted. The Nikkei finished flat, 0.03% down, but Shanghai rebounded around 0.1% up. That's after the latest figures showed China's trade surplus widened to $26 billion in August as imports declined slightly.
Yeah, imports down around 2% there for China in those latest figures. Let's take a look at a few more of the day's business stories for you now. Inspectors representing bailout creditors for Greece say they've hit deadlock over the austerity programme. Officials have rejected parts of the government's latest proposals on €11 billion of spending cuts. Greece must make the savings or risk going bankrupt if lenders refuse the latest €30 billion of its bailout funding.
Mining giant Xstrata has announced 600 redundancies in Australia to cut costs as it weighs up a renewed takeover from commodities trader Glencore. The firm has received an improved $37 billion offer from Xstrata, its biggest shareholder. If the deal goes through, Xstrata boss Mick Davis has indicated he would quit to let Glencore chief Ivan Glasenberg head up the newly merged group.
And the US government is attempting to get rid of some of its share in AIG, the insurance firm it had to bail out during the Wall Street crash of 2008. The US Treasury is selling $18 billion of shares in AIG. That's to institutional investors only. The sale should take the government's holding below a majority stake for the first time since it spent nearly $190 billion on the biggest bailout of the global financial crisis.
Now, next for you, another trader on trial. Kwaku Aduboli was the trader at the centre of the scandal that cost Swiss bank UBS $2 billion, as well as the job of its former chief executive. He's due to be tried later this Monday for a string of fraud charges. Caterina Vitozzi has more.
Kwaku Adeboli's day in court comes nearly a year to the day after UBS accused the trader of losing $2.3 billion. The Swiss bank says while working in London on their Delta One desk between 2008 and September 2011, Adeboli gambled on unauthorised futures positions. The 32-year-old allegedly bought and sold exchange-trade funds on a variety of stock markets that went undetected by the bank's risk limiters. Adeboli's been charged with fraud and false accounting. He's pleaded not guilty, but if convicted, he could face up to 10 years in prison. UBS too expects to come under close scrutiny.
It is important to note that UBS is not a party in the trial and there is only one defendant in the dock. However, given how serious the consequences of the incident were, we must assume that UBS's culture and practices will be examined during the course of the trial.
UBS says the incident led to a loss in last year's third quarter. Then CEO Oswald Grubel also resigned during the fallout. Meanwhile, Swiss and UK financial regulators have launched their own investigation into UBS's role in the event.
And just before we go, proof that you should be very, very careful what you throw away. You just never know what it might be worth.
We were just talking about this, Stuart, whether Stuart Norval can spot an impressionist classic. Well, one woman in the United States didn't originally. She found this Renoir at a flea market in Virginia in the United States. Wasn't sure if it was worth anything. Well, it is now. She took it to be valued. It's estimated that it's worth $100,000. It'll go on auction in the next few days or weeks or so. Believed to have been bought from a Parisian gallery back in 1926 and rediscovered, as I say, at a flea market in the United States.
Even signed as well. You thought somebody would have spotted that a little earlier.
There you go. If you've ever found anything like that, had a flea market experience where you found something very valuable, do let me know. I'd love to hear about it on Twitter. You should be able to see my details. There you go, on the bottom of the screen, at Owen France 24.
Excellent stuff. I can't spot an impressionist painting. I can spot an impressionist business presenter sitting over there. Owen Fairclough with the business here on France 24. Latest news up after the break. Claire will be here very shortly.